Hey everybody, welcome to Elseworlds Exchange. I'm Sal, and I'm joined today by Chris Arendt from Newsarama. And why don't you tell them your experience in the comic book reporting world has been storied, and you've done a lot of work. It's like every time I read about anything when it comes to comics, I see, or if I bother to check, I usually see your name attached to it in some way. Like you're pretty on top of everything, and you're often like giving a kind of like balanced opinion or report of goings on in the comic book world.
Thank you for that. Yes, I've been writing about comics since 2003. I've been editor at Newsarama since 2015. I've also a freelance on the side here and there for like everybody from CBR to Publishers Weekly. I judged the Eisners last year, and that was a lot of fun. But yeah, I try to see what's going on in comics in the industry, and I'm really invested in the people of comics. I think that's like the lifeblood of comics. So approaching it from that perspective and kind of branching out from there with what I'm able to, like, and also lifting up the voices of other people that are talking about that is kind of what I try to do with my little small piece of comics.
That's a very noble, I think, is the fair term to say, because I noticed that when it comes to reporting, when it comes to talking about any kind of media, whether it's comics, movies, music, TV, usually the reporting side is about either telling you, like, either it's a press release or it's some kind of like clickable, is this happening? Or is it, some outrageous thing that, you can't prove occurring right now? Please click. And then we'll maybe get a click, and then we can continue. Your reports are normally like facts, which I do appreciate, and which I value, and which is important and rare in today's world. What would you say, in your opinion, kind of keeps you there and kind of gets you kind of going, like, I got to report on that, and I try to kind of avoid the rest of it. Like, why do you prioritize that?
Sorry, you seem to froze up for a second. Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, I'm fortunate to have a really good team with me. I've got my editor-in-chief, Mike Duran, who founded Newsarama, and also our main writer, George Marston. We can kind of balance that out. Like, we do cover things going on in the comics, like whatever's going on in the latest issue of Batman, or X-Men is also something we cover. But we also, I found there to be an opening in basically the reporting about comics as an industry and a place that people work and a place that people congregate and are fans and are people. So I try to balance that out. Like even if the clicks aren't there for it, I try to balance that out and like find a way to do a story that may get the clicks that pays for the writers that I have working with us to get paid what they're worth or close to it, while also delivering news that may not get the most hits, but it's kind of a trade-off. It's an odd bit of balance and triage that we constantly go through, that I try to get what's important out there to people that work in the industry and people that are interested in the industry, and also just the people that are interested in the comic books and want to know what's in the new issue of X-Men.
It's interesting because I've noticed that in my experience, which is in no way comics journalism, like it's in no way what we do. We're a comic book themed YouTube channel. I've heard it's described as like a fandom channel. We kind of celebrate the fandom and talk about the stories and the characters and analysis about that. We don't talk about like the too much about the goings on within the industry, or try to like scoop or let people know like what's happening right away or when it first happens. But I noticed that even in our limited capacity, there seems to be almost like two worlds in the comic book reading universe. There's one world that cares a lot about like the nitty gritty, or at the very least, like about the creators, the industry, the publishers, like what they're doing, why they're doing it. And then there's the other half that's like, I'm only really interested in what Spider-Man is up to this week. And even then, like, it's only a very small, like, it's my sphere. It's like the people or the characters that I'm interested in the universe that I'm interested in. Don't even talk to me about like who writes it, what it's all about, how it gets made. I just want to read the stories. Do you find that there is a separation, or do you see a separation in your line of work?
First, let me say that I do think that your YouTube show is comics journalism. It's just we have a very broad world, and yes, I do news and reporting, and we do some reviews and things like that. But also, even commentary, which is what you do, is part of comics journalism. So don't feel like you're out on your own. You're a part of a much bigger thing here.
Well, thank
And
you.
that's the point of what you were saying about how people come to comics for different reasons, and that's perfectly acceptable and encouraged, and that's what makes comics so multifaceted. I have a friend who's just a fan of a certain character, and they only engage in comics when it's about that character, and that's perfectly fine. Then I have some other people that either work in the industry or work on the periphery of that are interested in it for a variety of different of reasons, and it's kind of like the multiverse of DC, and like, and even I guess in some cases the dark multiverse that Scott Snyder introduced. That there's all these different ways that people can enjoy comics, and that's all perfectly acceptable and encouraged. And if we didn't have all these people coming in from different ways, like, I think the comics industry and the comics fandom would suffer from not having this many opinions and this many voices and this many eyes on the product.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree. I also feel like if there were, it's like when you were a fan of movies as a kid. For me in particular, when I was a fan of movies as a kid, I liked the movie, and then later on I got like in depth into it. Like, I wanted to know more about the movie that I enjoyed, so then I got into like audio commentaries, and I got into like learning directors and getting into that, and I became like a meta watcher where I'm like, oh, like I see like how they had a crane shot here. I saw like how they changed the scene, or I remember a deleted scene that informs the whole thing. So you're meta watching the movie as you're watching it. I think if like the industry was only populated by film students, movies would not be the way they are today. And I think the same things with comics. Like if there was one homogenized audience of people who only liked their own spheres, or who only knew all the facets of the industry, you'd have a very different, I think, a unremarkable world, because it's like, no, it is about the diversity, like you said. It is about like the ideas that are being put forth from a spectrum of people. From your perspective, what brought you in? Like, what made you go from, like, were you a comic fan and then went into the reporting side, or was it something else?
Oh, I was definitely a comics fan. I got in the comics through, well, I got into comic book heroes through a little Superman book when I was a kid in the early 80s. It's not even comics. I think it adapted some Kurt Swan artwork into a little prose novel for kids. As for comics itself, I got into it through G.I. Joe and Transformers, the old Marvel licensed titles. And through there, I got a copy of X-Men Annual by Claremont and Davis, and that really jumped me. X-Men Annual 12 with Horde, where Wolverine gets drunk, and that really got me into that. There was a period where I took a break from comics in the 90s where I got into music, but I came back in the late 90s, and then segued into comics journalism just from reading everything going on in the internet and seeing all these. Like, I read a Wizard and Comic Buyer's Guide and Comics Journal back in the 90s, but just seeing it on the internet and this kind of even playing field, like democratization of writing about comics, and how people could write about it from anywhere. And that got me in. I got my first job. It's a weird set of circumstances. I got my first job filling in for Rich Johnston when he wrote a column for CBR before he went on to co-found Bleeding Cool. And so I got my start there. And then my first interview was actually with Kurt Busiek about a great little Superman miniseries called Superman Secret Identity. I was kind of thrown with that.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I kind of got my start there. And for a long time, I didn't even consider myself a news reporter. That really wasn't even my specialty. It was all about interviews and conversations and all that. And then I kind of segued to this, but I found that that gives me a basis to have conversations with people to get this kind of news that isn't delivered in a press release or isn't just posted on a website. Or if it is posted on a website, maybe it's on one behind like a paywall or available only to retailers that isn't known by everybody, but if given the right context, it would be important for readers to learn about. So yeah, it kind of grew very organically.
Yeah. Now, today, I think it's fair to say that you are a comics journalist, and I think that what's interesting, I think, about media journalism in general is that it seems to me, and this is no slight against that industry, but it seems to me that a lot of people who get into comics journalism or media journalism, entertainment journalism, they don't start with a journalistic background. They don't go to school to become a journalist. They do whatever. Do you think that it is important to have a kind of journalistic background, even if it is you read a lot, you read Wizard and Comics Buyer's Guide, and you had an influence, a bedrock of other sources. At the very least, you read the news, so it informed you in some way about how to kind of even if you weren't I'm going to write so and so or I'm going to do this. It was kind of it informed you and then said I'm going to when you started to report on it. That experience of having read and having experienced it informed your style and your approach to the medium. You think it's important to have a kind of a journalistic background, or at least to train oneself in the facets of journalism to be able to report on it, or do you think it kind of comes about organically?
I did write for a local newspaper before I got into this, but I didn't have a degree, thing like that. I do think that kind of skill is useful, but I don't think it's to the point of exclusionary to other things. I'm fully aware that not all people are able to go to journalism schools. Get basically a locale or just the cost, which I really feel for people on that. So I don't think that's the only path to that, but I think it is. The skills they teach there are ones that a person who wants a full-time career in this will need to pick up on their own, either through school or through self-learning or just through experience in actually doing this. I did comics journalism part-time for 12 years before I got it full-time. I was freelancing, doing comics journalism, doing copy editing, and doing graphic design before I decided to take it on full time. But so I think there are skills, but going back, there is a variety in it. There is people that can work full time in comics journalism that don't need to do actual reporting, but maybe do commentary or reviews or data analysis. There are paths for that, but because the microcosm of comics journalism is so small, it does better serve people to be well rounded to be able to do several different kinds of writing. So training is always good, but it doesn't necessarily have to be school. It can be just a life experience, although that does kind of take longer and it asks more of how you're learning it and all the mistakes that you make. So.
Right. Now, you proposed this idea on Twitter a while back, and that's what kind of lit a fire under me to finally reach out to you and be like, we should talk about this. And it's because I found it so interesting, and my response was a little bit of a downer, which is another reason why I wanted to talk about it. And it was that you were like, why isn't there anyone out there talking about exclusively talking about the comic book industry itself? Every news site out there talks about comics and occasionally will touch upon the industry, but why isn't there just one dedicated place to just talk about how the industry's working, or any kind of elements thereof that kind of inform the world around it, because as we have gone through this ridiculous shared experience together, as you know, with respect to the pandemic, like the comics industry has gone through, I don't know, like 12 or 13 massive shifts over the last 4 months. And it would be interesting to have like one kind of like source to kind of document it, and because like the concept itself is something that I would have absolutely like subscribed to, because it would be a great and handy tool. But like that was kind of your idea. What was the impetus behind that, like kind of musing and kind of like, I think because we're talking about a tweet, I thought like let's contextualize it, like pitch your concept essentially again, if you don't mind, and we'll talk about that, because like that's
basically with everything that's been happening in the past few months. It brought up an old idea that I've been carrying around for a while, and other people have carried before me, like the late Tom Spurgeon of Comics Reporter. Is there's so much going on in the industry that it's impossible to cover it all, even within what's going on in the comic book pages itself. But there is so much going on in the industry as a workplace, as a community, that there is room for it in terms of readership. I believe for a full-time person or persons to write about it, the covering the Me Too movement and the sexual harassment and of fans and of comic creators and comic staffers, and all that, to the industry side of things, like the deeper things that are going on with it regarding comics distribution, regarding digital distribution, like even the way we consume comics in terms of format, like where it is now versus where it could be in a few years. There's many things that could be discussed. When I posted the question on Twitter, it's something that has been on my mind for years, and something back in the 90s, there was a magazine just for retailers. It kind of covered this, but also Tom Spurgeon's ComicsReporter.com, the late great Tom Spurgeon, did a version of this. So the idea isn't new, but the want for it is more prevalent now than ever, because there's so much going on that comics news outlets aren't able to cover in a given day due to skills training, like you said, to basically report on it accurately, to even budgets in terms of being able to pay someone what they're worth to cover this kind of thing. But it all comes down to what you say is clicks. We're really fortunate, we're really privileged that most all comics journalism, which includes your YouTube show, which includes a Newsarama, is free for people to read. Right. But there is the side effect to that is it's based on advertising, and so it gets bigger or smaller based on the advertising. I love comics journalism, but it is a sad reality that some of my favorite comics journalism sites are no longer around, and that could be business reasons or it could be other personal reasons. People do great writing about comics on a volunteer basis, or do it underpaid or no paid, but as someone that works full-time in the industry, that's not something that I want to ask people to write about things for free, especially when I'm being paid for it.
Right.
Could I write about things more? I could full-time write about comics news and never be about, I don't know, who Batman punched this week.
Right.
Unfortunately, there's no readership that I've found that'll support it financially to make it something where it's sustainable. I would love to be proven wrong. I would love to be proven wrong. You see success with things like David Harper's sketch and Hassan's X panel that's gone to a subscription model.
Yes.
To do comics commentary and comics analysis, and that could be a way forward for someone that wanted to try that. But it's just an idea that I've been looking at and trying to figure out a way to accomplish it. And I don't know, it would be beneficial to the industry, but it's several people have discussed it, and I've discussed it with several people. I've had meetings with several people, and it's just the support there to make it something where people could do this sustainably. So far, like, hasn't been discovered to be there. Like, but yeah, but like I said, like I would love to be proven wrong.
Yeah, because what you're talking about is something I think we need. Like, I think we need at least one. I like diversity of news. I think that if it's one source, obviously it has the potential to be influenced by the single source that it comes from. But I like the idea of a diversity of news outlets, and I think that it's incredibly necessary to have a kind of like a kind of industry analysis source, like where that's their dedication, that's what they do. And you hit the nail right on the head. It is all about economics, isn't it? Because it's not just about being able to pay people to do the work, that's one of the most important things, but it's not just that. Though I will say, with that regard, you need to be able to pay people to do that kind of work, because you're holding them up to a higher standard. You're like, you need to be able to report on this accurately, quickly, consistently. You got to be able to ask hard questions. You got to be able to talk about hard issues. You got to know what you're talking about. That all has value. But you also need to be able to sustainably earn off of that. You need to be able to find a revenue source to be able to pay them, and it all comes down to the economics of it. And you need to be able to get either advertisers or subscriptions. In either way, it comes down to being able to get paid in some fashion, which kind of kills me, because like that, for me, that's like the problem with the news overall. It's about trying to earn off of the news. Like, the news is one of the most basic and fundamentally important aspects of our culture, and yet it's also a business. And I feel like just because business is good and business makes money and business is what like drives the American economy, doesn't mean that it is good for news or for reporting. And just because the populace doesn't necessarily want to click on your news doesn't mean that your news doesn't have value, and doesn't mean that the news shouldn't be out there. It's up to the newsman, so to speak, or the news person to say, or to convince the reader, you should read what I'm talking about, and leave the economics to the pencil pushers. I'm so glad you mentioned Panel X Panel, because, yeah, they are a subscription model, and they are able to make something. I remember somebody talking about it like a while ago, and they were like, if you liked Wizard, this is like a better Wizard, because it's like it's actually substantial. It's not just about the economics or about like the flash or about the superficiality. It actually gets into the art and the importance, and yet it's sustained through subscriptions. I think that's the way. I think that's the only way right now. Unless we completely upend the system and say like, oh no, like there's just allocated grant money for legitimate news sources, which I don't think is possible.
The ideas of capitalism and business are sometimes at odds with journalism and presenting news. And
yes.
You'll see comic sites like Newsarama and Comics Journalism basically try to diversify and cover a little bit of everything.
Right.
And I think that's better than the idea of not covering it at all. Yeah. And we have some really good reporters that do write about it and kind of go through this reporting. But there always could be more. There's like you said, there's bright spots of specialization, like with Panel X Panel, with Sketch, with women who write about comics. Yes. like even basically books like that. And there is a place for it, but there's not. I don't know.
Well, it's not like I don't. I think because the the way we get our news and the way that news is presented now, like what you described are all excellent sources. It's just that they come out too infrequently and too slowly. Like, we need a news site where it's like, every morning, here is the news. Every time something happens, it is reported on and out. Like, if, you know, a book gets canceled, we find out about it. If a comic shop closes, we find out about it. If you know, a publisher changes distribution houses, we'll find out about it within the day. But we should be able to know, you know, any seismic shift in the industry as it's happening, because we get that equivalent across. Like, if any celebrity has a thing, it's out there and it's reported on. Like, it's not just, you know, somebody has a meltdown on Twitter. It is a journalist has reported on it and written it and used their skills to present it to the public. And we don't have that. Like, not to the extent that I think you're suggesting, and to the extent that I want it, because I completely agree with you. The other issue I think is, oh, good, if you're going to say anything, but.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, but like, I can see it. I am certainly biased towards everything, but in terms of that reporting, I can see the cost and time involved that it takes for that kind of reporting, and
right.
It's it's basically said, finding like a way to support it, if it's not click based, if it's subscriber based. Or I have looked into the grant model. I've looked into underwriting, and I would love for someone to prove me wrong, to maybe figure out a way to do this, or at least continue pushing the bar to increase how it's reported. Like, even if it's gone down, like even if it's into specializing in one specific area and just really pushing towards that area in a sustainable way, then that's something I would fully support. Like, from judging the Eisners and looking back at like the Eisner categories for best comics journalism, it's thrilling and disappointing that some of the greatest sites and outlets that are covered each year are ones that are volunteer based, where they're doing it for the love of comics, and that's a powerful thing. But it's unfortunate that the winners of those awards in some cases aren't even being paid for their work, and so it's just about trying to find a way to do that where it's respectful to the industry, respectful to the people they're reporting on, respectful to the readers, but also respectful to the writer that's being asked to go through with this, especially when it's about some pretty serious subject matter, such as the sexual harassment and sexual misconduct, and even like criminal cases that I'm reporting on.
Yeah, it's there. I think that there is a place for it, and I think that the funny thing is, you know, there are higher profile comic news sites that, like you said, try to touch upon everything. And the thing about it is, you know, like, Newsarama is a good site that actually does give you like a good smattering of everything. But I wouldn't want to change it. Like, I think that Newsarama and sites like it provide their style. Like, this is what they do, you know? And it's like, we're talking about a totally different animal. So, you know, there's room for it all. And like, there's room for Bleeding Cool. There's room for all of it. And this would just be another thing. And that other thing, like you said, the problem is it needs to also stand head and shoulders economically with all the other news sites, because otherwise, even if it does the work and it gets it done, let's say like grant money or subscription based model, or like a kind of Indiegogo or Patreon kind of system, if nobody's reading it, it's still it's going to fall by the wayside just from fatigue and lack of interest and you know, and like you said, people need to get paid, because otherwise, another issue with not getting paid is like, it's burnout is much quicker, I think. If you're doing it voluntarily and you feel like you're not getting recognition for it, or you're not making an impact, or you're not like, you know, reaching anybody. It's just going to settle in that much faster, and you're going to lose some good people who would otherwise be like titans in that aspect of the industry.
And I think you can. There's a really good analogy back to comic books where you see maybe some of your favorite comic creators that for some reason don't do comics anymore or don't do it at the level that they're used to, and it could be their passion for comics has gone down, or it could be that they've, for their own personal reasons, for their family, for themselves, they decide to go into another area that maybe is more sustainable, is more secure, maybe pays more. Like I'm a big fan of comics art, and some of my favorite comics artists no longer work in comics but work in animation, things like that, because in some cases that's like a staff position that's unionized. There's more regular work. But going back to comic sales, like you'll have like for most like work for hire books like Marvel and DC and any company owned stuff, if a book is canceled, it's the reason it's more often than not that its sales weren't there to support it, and that's a really brass tacks kind of unfortunate way to look at it. But there's very few titles that are canceled just because the writer and artist are done, have told their story, and decided not to continue. Because you'll see that if the money's flowing in and it's profitable, the companies will bring in people to take up and do the next run and do the next run and do the next run.
Yeah.
So that can go back to comics, where you'll see some of your favorite comic series that either come out intermittently or basically are canceled. It's just, in some cases, it's down to where it's not sustainable for the writer or artist to do that and make a living. So.
Right. Well, and it's all connected. You see, like what's frustrating is, like, if there were a more consistent source for the inside baseball of comics, or for just the reporting on the nitty-gritty and for the industry, it educates the populace and it allows them to be able to support some of those books that are dying. You know, I was just thinking recently about how important it might be to try and really, really disseminate the information about how pre-ordering works, because it's like the burden of responsibility of a book's success is on the reader, but not to the extent that like any other product on the shelf is up to the purchaser. You know, if you want anything, you just go buy it. But with comics, if you want that thing to keep being on the shelf, you have to go through a number of items. Like, you can't just be like, I buy it every month, I don't understand why it doesn't sell. You have to also tell your comic retailer to pre-order the book. You have to like project whether, like, you have to know whether you want to buy a thing off of a shelf 3 months in advance. And it's that whole aspect is largely, and when I say that, I don't mean like you, viewer, who are commenting right now that you know how it works. I'm talking about everyone else out there who just buy the comic and don't think about it. That education is paramount to how your book will continue to be on the shelf. And if there were a source that could consistently and directly educate the audience would be able to be more of an advocate for their medium. So I think that it's all interconnected, and it all like kind of feeds into itself. Like, this kind of idea helps all of it, and you know, you can translate it into not just being like, oh, we have a chance to win an Eisner or talk about, you know, these elements of the industry that I care about. No. It's also how we can save your books and how we can keep other stories afloat and, you know, rise up independent creators, independent publishers. The sky's the limit. My question to you is, when it comes to this idea, in an ideal world, what does this look like? Let's say there's a crazy old, like, you know, billionaire who's like, I love this idea, make it happen.
That's a good question. It'll be about getting a good name, getting a base staff of at least 3 full-time writers, behind them for fact checking. You can probably slim it down, but at that level, you couldn't do anything close to daily content or the deep reporting that it takes to do a story. Like, for instance, a story I did on the Eisner voting being basically put on hold. That's maybe a 400-word article, but that took about, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours to basically, like, over the course of a week of talking to about 10 different people to put together.
Yeah,
for a bigger
that's awesome.
Take a longer. But getting back to the point, it would also take basically someone to set up someone to design the website and maintain the website and do the social media. It would take someone to have a legal person on staff to run stories by, to figure out how to do it in a way that is would eliminate the threat of a lawsuit or anything like that, but just ways to mitigate it and just to make to present it in a way that would be defensible. Because we've like if you've been following the news, you've seen comics journalists and comics creators being basically prone to receiving lawsuits about things that they said that maybe isn't phrased the right way, or maybe passes along incorrect information as fact, and that could lead you to be legally culpable. I really don't want to put a dollar figure on it, but yeah, it would take probably just a team of 3 writers and an editor just to begin with, and they would all have to be relatively trained. I could give you a list off the air, like if you wanted, of people that I would recommend to do it.
Oh, totally.
Even if it's not me doing it, like I'm fine here at Newsarama, but I'm ready. I don't know. Who knows? But yeah, there's people out there that are trained in doing it, but it's all about finding a way to make it worth their while to do on a continuing basis, and to make it sustainable.
Yeah. How would you present it? Like, when it comes to presenting this information, and make it, because I think that, the economics of it forces news to have to be sexy, and it has to be like in an appealing way. It's got to be like sensationalized. I think that there is more to it than that. I think that the sexiness of news is also not just to get clicks and to get money. It's also just to get out there. Because with a staff of 3 and with an infrastructure that's relatively small, obviously the concept would be to grow it, to make it bigger, and to get like more expansive, and to talk about a more variety of things. But in that process, you have to make it presentably appealing. Would you want, is it just the way we've been getting it? Like columns, articles, or would you want to get integrate video into that as well? Do you think that comics journalism could use video? Because I've noticed that there isn't much in terms of comics journalism and video. I've noticed that it's more about like you said, the commentary, or when it comes to the big 2, it's PR. It's self-produced kind of like presentations that are basically just press releases.
I think that the core of it would be text, because in many ways it all starts there. Like if you're reporting a story on YouTube, you have some text to go by. But I think thinking a bigger picture about putting the news in places that people will go, and that may not be reading a 500, 1,000. Like yesterday, Newsarama published a 4,000-word article, and it was important, but like many times I'll be like, most people aren't going to read down to the bottom.
Right.
But basically putting it where people can see it. That would be video, because there's more comic stores than ever that have the TV screens. You can set a deal kind of like Comic Shop News, but for video, where you provide them content. Maybe like a weekly podcast on a Friday or on a Monday, just catching people up on these are like things that you should know about. Because there's people that read comics full time, and comics are a full time passion, but there's a humongous unserved audience of people that just want to drop in and learn a couple things about comics, but not have to be devoted full time. So top 5 kind of news stories about comics and podcasts, video format. There's even the possible of doing old school print stuff for special conventions. Like Newsarama used to do a newsletter every day of San Diego Comic-Con that was only available at San Diego Comic-Con.
Huh.
And like, for instance, like you go there on a Saturday, the Saturday morning edition would have what happened in the major panels the night before that you may have missed. There could be things like that, or just guides to the city from a comic person's perspective. But at the end of the day, it's about putting the news where people will consume it. Text is the default and the easiest, but that it doesn't mean that it should be the only basically way to get news out to people, especially in this day and age.
I love that podcast idea. That's something that's so doable. That's like almost passive in its execution, especially via the infrastructure of the news itself. But that's something that's something they could do right now, where it's like they just aggregate every news site and go, here's the things that are the most important that happened this week. I love that idea. God, that's such a good idea. I have to imagine it exists.
Yeah, someone should tell us in the comments or in social media that we are behind the times, that it's already happening. They're going to give us a link, and we're going to talk about it. Like, I would love someone to prove us wrong right now.
Yeah, please, because then we will have the thing that we want. Like, and I think because that's the thing, is that what we're hungry for is just a clean, direct, unbiased, and uninfluenced presentation of what's going on. And, you know, and the other thing about it, and you don't have to comment on this, it's more just like my own personal opinion. I feel like unbiased news keeps the bigwigs honest. And I think that knowing that you're being checked and knowing that a trusted, established news outlet is going to hold your feet to the flames as a company, as a publisher, as an editor, it keeps you more honest, and it keeps you on the beaten path. Just that fear. I've noticed that there are some in the comic book industry who have taken to silence over even the most basic of PR, copy. And I'm like, that should not be the new normal. The new normal should not be stonewalling your audience with information that is happening that is directly influencing the product you're putting out.
Yeah, that's something that we reported on early on when Diamond halted distribution at the end of. Yeah. There was probably a period of about 4 weeks where Marvel didn't put out anything except for messages privately to retailers to tell readers what's going on. So we would basically get those retailer only behind closed doors kind of missives that were sent out and kind of post those and kind of explain to people what it's mean, because basically the sometimes not communicating is communication, and that may not be the best thing, especially when people have questions and there's a lot of uncertainty. Just to have clarity, like even if you say, I don't know what's going on, but we're working on it, that can like offer some sort of clarity and a little bit of peace of mind for the people that work in the industry, but also people that are fans and are interested in it. Because comics is, for many of us, it's a habitual thing. So if we go without it for several months, it may be hard to get back on the horse again.
Yeah. I also noticed that it's important not just for the comic fan or for the comic consumer, for the comic creators. You saw there were creators who were like, I don't know what the hell's going on, and it's like, you work for the company, man. How could you not know? And it's like, because they're not part of the need to know. Mm-hmm. The DiDio situation, when Dan DiDio was let go, there is no official statement at all. There's no formal statement from the company that let him go that he was let go at all. Mm. It's just outrageous to me. So I guess at the end of the day, for me, it's just, we'd like some kind of consistent and an integral news source. Or better yet, how about 4? You know what I mean? I think at the end of the day, it's about, just disseminating information in the most honest and direct and straightforward manner that we can get it. What are some sources of news that you like to patronize?
For news, everything I read, I understand there's, like you were mentioning before about the unbiased news. Like I used to be of that mindset, but I think everything has bias. It's just inherent. And it's
True.
just about understanding that and kind of factoring that in for a news site. This is getting off your point, but just
Oh.
having someone in charge that understands people's biases and kind of uses those and kind of factors that into the conversation. Like when I have someone writing about Green Lantern, I kind of want them to be biased to liking Green Lantern. You know, when I
Right.
have someone
Yeah.
writing about retail, I want someone to be biased towards understanding retail. But getting back to the issue, like uh, besides Newsarama, CBR has had some good reporting as of late. Brett at Graphics Policy, when they do reporting, has done some solid reporting. Heidi's Comics Beat has been a site that I've been going to since I was a reader and following Heidi since the 90s through various outlets. Women Who Write About Comics has been a great place for commentary and just perspectives that I'm unfamiliar with. Panel X Panel, I love that. I got to see that from its kind of birth and talking to Hassan before he launched that, and I was kind of familiar with what he like other paths he almost took before he did that. I'm so glad it's worked out for him. David Harper at Sketch, the podcast, and his written pieces are great. I do still read the Comics Journal. There is a place for that. And also going back into longer form academic journals and academic books can really give you just a different perspective. Although it's not written for the casual reader, I'm finding like a lot of information and just news that kind of misses the front pages of the news websites that are basically found in those types of journals.
Hmm. And what's great is, if you're a casual news reader, you're like you graduate. Sometimes like you find you're like, okay, that kind of scratched the surface. Then you go further and you go deeper, and then you can get into the academics as you advance. I'm glad you shared those, because I think that if anyone is like watching this, it's like, hey, I don't want to just imagine a source. Where can I go right now to read anything about what's going on? Or maybe some people are like, that's actually kind of interesting because I've never thought about it. I never thought about it when I was a kid. We used to get the comic shop news, which I think they still make.
Yes, Cliff still that every week out of Atlanta. So.
Yeah, my comic book retailer was very he felt that was very important, and I never got a bag without the comic shop news in it. And as I got older, I remember I started to fall away from comics, and so I picked up like magazines about comics because that was a little more of like an aggregator. I could be like, now I know what's going on, and if there's anything that's more interesting or that appeals to me, I can know to go pick that up, as opposed to just blindly grabbing books. But like very quickly into my comics reading career as a kid, like I got plugged into even passively understanding it, like the meta reading of comics. And I think that it's important to at least, even if you only care about what Batman's doing or who he's punching, I think that it's important to at least know a little bit about the industry that you support, because there is a value there, and knowing a little bit about how the industry functions, or knowing a little bit about where the people who make the thing that you're reading are coming from, allows you to kind of like refine your palate a little bit. And you'll see highlights on creators and independent publishers and new initiatives, and you get to see like all this stuff that you wouldn't normally, even like when you go to a comic book store, especially if you're like only interested in one particular thing, you got blinders on. You don't normally look at all the other stuff, and I would never have been aware of like some of the greatest comics works of all time if I wasn't in some way plugged into it or had a trusted news source say to me, "This is really cool. You should check it out." Chris, where can everybody find your work And, you know, and if you got anything else to plug, please do so.
I report pretty much every day of the week, even on weekends sometimes, at newsarama.com. I'm on Twitter under my name, Chris Arendt. Those are pretty much my two places. I'm working on some nonfiction books and doing some freelance on the side, but nothing to announce right now. But for people that have questions about comics or just want recommendations or just want to tell me I'm wrong, like I'm fully prepared for that, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. And or here in the YouTube comments thread, and I'll be glad to talk with everybody.
Great. Chris, thanks so much for sitting down and talking with me. This was originally going to be just a Twitter conversation, and I was like, I think we could actually talk about this on the show, and we can get some of these ideas out a little faster. Yeah. But thanks so much for sitting with me. We really appreciate it. And, of course, check out more of Chris in the places that he mentioned. All the links will be in the description below this video. And we'll see you guys next week with an all-new episode. Thanks a lot for watching.